let me extend on behalf of the three organizations, the ICSB, C3S, and the Press Institute of India, let me warmly welcome this morning Professor V. N. Atri, Dr. P.K. Ghosh, and Professor Shankari Sundararaman. It's very good to have the three of you here. We look forward to the next session and the session after that, which will be chaired by Commodore Vasan. I see that there are some new names or people who went with us on day one who are here for their benefit. Although Commodore Vasan is known to many of us, a brief introduction. Commodore Vasan, who retired after serving the Indian Navy, is head of strategy and security studies, Center for Asia Studies, and he's also the director of the Chennai Center for China Studies and regional director of the National Maritime Foundation, Tamil Nadu. An alumnus of the Defense Services Staff College and the College of Naval Warfare, Commodore Vasan has had a distinguished career spanning more than 34 years. His wide-ranging appointments, both at sea and shore, include command of warships, appointment in the carrier-borne wing of INS Vikrant, command of long-range maritime reconnaissance and anti-submarine warfare squadron, a major naval air station, INS Rcep, and commanded another air station, INS Garuda, on the west coast. He was on the faculty for over 2 years at the Naval War College that trained senior-level officers from all the three services. Commodore Vasan was on deputation to the Indian Coast Guard from 2000 to 2003 as the Eastern Regional Commander with maritime jurisdiction in the Bay of Bengal, including the Indo-Bangladesh maritime border and the Indo-Sri Lanka maritime border. Needless to say, but I must point this out, that Commodore Vasan and his team at C3S have been a great source of support for both ICSB and PII in organizing such webinars and, of course, the workshops we've had earlier. Over to you, Commodore.
Thank you, Mr. Shashi, for that introduction. And I'm very happy to see so many people who I know from the past. I'd like to lead on from the previous session, which was a very important one, in trying to understand the potential of comprehensive maritime power. I must thank Admiral Muralidharan, who quoted from Sardar Panikkar, because though it was written decades ago, every word that's been written there, every sentence that is there, tells us how we have perhaps failed Sardar Panikkar in understanding the importance of the oceans. So that's a sad part. Also, from the previous sessions, since there are a lot of youngsters here, I just would like to make only one point to say that it is not all that pessimistic as was presented, but we are good at acknowledging facts, which is a very great strength of a democracy. What China can do obviously cannot be done by us. We are trying to differentiate between a PSU and a private yard. There is no such differentiation in China. So everybody is told to get on with business and provide targets by in 5 years or 10 years or whatever, which is why where they are. It does not mean that we replicate everything there. There are good practices, and we'll definitely copy some of the good practices that are there. I'm just taking another 2 minutes to reassure the audience here, which also consists of a lot of youngsters who should not feel that all is lost for a maritime India. It is not so. Let me reassure you. In fact, in the last 4 to 5 years, the inland waterways that was mentioned by Admiral Muralidharan has been given a lot of importance. We started moving ships and cargo in this. We have connectivity to Calcutta and ports in Bangladesh. There is a phenomenal amount of importance given to increasing our heft in the maritime domain. So this is only to reassure all of us that yes, it is all work in progress. But unless there is this maritime consciousness that we are talking about, there's not much that we can do. The policy formulations have been taking some time, but that's perhaps okay in a democracy with the governments coming and going. But as long as there is a maritime culture, which is what we are trying to bring about through these forums, and everybody understands the importance of geography, importance of what we need to do, then I think would have done a lot of justice. As Mr. Shashi has brought out, we are roughly behind by about 30 minutes, and that's not a good sign, which only means perhaps we may have to skip lunch session like yesterday. That means we'll continue without the lunch. But I would not like to deprive the wonderful three speakers that we have today of their presentation. However, I'll request them to restrict it to 15 to 20 minutes. And I will definitely sound the warning bell around 15 minutes so that you have enough time to conclude the session. Another request that I have is that I see many of them who have got their cameras on. The cameras could only be kindly switched on only by those who are in the panel, and all the others are requested to kindly mute themselves as well as switch off their cameras so that there is no distraction, and also we are conserving our bandwidth. Let me welcome Professor Atri, Professor Shankari, who I have known for decades now, and also the others who are here. Let me also introduce each one of them. Just give me a second. Yeah, we have Professor Atri, who will go first, and he is the chair in the Indian Ocean Studies, CIOS, at the Indian Ocean Region Association, which was formerly the IOR-ARC, and it was brought down to IORA to give it more meaning and brevity. And he's been there since 2014. He's one of the leading experts on blue economy. When we are talking about building a comprehensive national power, which is the theme of this session, we need to understand that everything that we want to do to build a comprehensive maritime power potential is defined virtually by the blue economy. Whether it is tourism, whether it is shipbuilding, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is port-led development, whether it is even the harnessing of the oceans for living and non-living resources. It's important that we understand that blue economy will drive our resource management and also enable us in this journey to become a comprehensive maritime power-enabled nation. He's also been the architect of the blue economy in the Indian Ocean region, and he is the managing editor, a Journal of Indian Ocean Rim Studies, which is available online. And he's also been a visiting scholar at the University of California, Los Angeles, and at George Washington University. So he's contributed intensely to the 6 priority areas and to the 2 focus areas of IORA, which also synchronize with the Sustainable Development Goals. With this, may I request Professor Atri to lead the discussions, and you have 20 minutes, sir. And with your permission, I'll remind you at 15 minutes so that we do not overshoot the time allotted, and also have enough time for question and answers. Thank you, and over to you, Professor Atri.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vasan, for this introduction. In fact, it is a great honor to be with you, and I have been listening most of the presentations since yesterday, and I'll be trying to build up my lecture in 3 phases. One is basically, I must admit that I am an economic philosopher, philosophizing the paradigm shift, you say. So that basically, let me take all of you back to the Structure of Scientific Revolution, a book which was published by Kuhan, a philosopher, in 1969, where he talks about the nature of scientific revolution and why there is a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift occurs because of the fact that the contemporary theories which are in circulation are unable to solve the existing or contemporary problems. So in that context, if I go back, the paradigm shift has started long back, sometime in 1960s. I have been studying this blue economy since 2014. Before I joined as a chair in Indian Ocean Studies, I was called by the MEA, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, New Delhi, and the joint secretaries there asked me a question, Professor Atri, IORA is focusing on blue economy since October 2014. Will you be able to manage it? And at that time, or even today, I share with you, if you talk to at least 10 economists, 7 or 6 of them will say, no, we don't know what is blue economy. So in that context, basically, soon after my joining, on 4th and 5th May 2015, there was a conference organized by IORA in Durban, South Africa, and where there was one session on blue economy. And as a researcher, I was asked to speak what are the research and research possibilities of the academician in blue economy. And I remember at that time, I raised the question, the very first question of defining blue economy, the measurement of blue economy, the definition of blue economy, the assessment of the exclusive economic zones. These were the three questions which I discussed in my presentation. And I remember that most of the delegates from all the 21 countries, because at that time IORA was 21 countries, now it is an organization of 22 countries, and there are now 10 dialogue partners. It's a very growing and dynamic organization, well committed to blue economy. So then some of the people, they said that, Prof, why you are talking about definition? We are not concerned about definition. It is a action-oriented program. It is a policy-oriented program, and let us concentrate on that. But I continue to disagree with all these suggestions, and then I saw that in 2015-16, the World Bank, the other international organization, WWF, then the Commonwealth, then the other regional groupings, they started talking about the blue economy. So, and they try to give the definition of the blue economy, although there is no consensus on the definition of the blue economy, and there cannot be consensus on the definition of the blue economy, but for, if I try to define in terms of Wuhan paradigm shift, the hardcore of the blue economy is becoming very much vivid and clear. There is no controversy in that. And what is that hardcore? That hardcore can be defined in terms of what we say sustainability, sustainable use of oceanic resources. That is the SDG goal 14, life below the earth, below water. So that basically over the last, you see, I may say 10 years, because I can take back to the year 2010, when Guntar Pali published a book, Blue Economy, 100 million jobs, 100 innovations, and in 10 years. So that brought a revolution in the blue economy. And in that, basically, he started with the 21 principles of blue economy, which are scientific in nature. So in that way, from time to time, I also try to give the various definitions of the blue economy, but now a broad idea or the broad consensus about the definition of the blue economy is converging towards the increasing level of economic activity in the ocean development space without compromising with the health of the ocean. So healthy ocean, productive ocean can lead us to the prosperity. I will not go into the details of that. Oceans are vital, because oceans are vital. They produce more than 50% of the oxygen needed for the people, and they are already stressed. Oceans are already stressed, and marine plastic pollution, ocean acidification, mitigation of climate change and all that, these are some of the very important problems with which oceans are struggling. And then basically what is being done by the WWF, what is being done by the World Bank and other international organizations, and what is the role of the ocean economy or the blue economy in terms of revitalizing the economy. So these are some of the things which I will try to touch very hurriedly. But first of thing, let me start with the definition of ecosystem. What is an ecosystem? It is also called environment. Is a natural unit consisting of all plants, animals, and microorganisms, biotic factors in an area functioning together with all known living physical abiotic factors of the environment. So that is basically, we should first try to understand the definition of ecosystem. And the in the different part of the world, the ocean have different ecosystems, divergent ecosystem in terms of loss, biodiversity and all that. And if I come to the Indian Ocean is very rich in terms of the biodiversity. And then if I come to India, India basically has a very rich biodiversity in that way. Then basically it is a question of talking about environmentalism, environment. So in you see 90s, there was a wave of environmentalism, green accounting. Then basically it is green investment and all that. And then if I take back you to 2012 United Nations Sustainable Development Conference, and there the SIDS, small island developing countries, made a case for ocean economy. That you are talking about the green economy, why don't you talk about the ocean economy? Because ocean economy is very crucial. And if we go to the data of the exclusive economic zone, to some of the very tiny island states, they have extensive exclusive economic zone. For example, in Mauritius, we have 2.3 million square kilometer of exclusive zone, whereas the area of Mauritius, land mass of the Mauritius is 2,064 kilometers. So in that way, there are vast resources in the exclusive economic zone available to the small island countries. So in that case, basically the question emerges, how or in what way we can utilize these small island developing countries' resources or the oceanic resources. Then there is a question of, you see, there is a concept of blue economy, there is a concept of brown economy, there is a concept of ocean economy, and most of the countries, there are 20 leading countries in area of ocean economy, which have been talking about in terms of measurement, assessment, and also basically the industry classification. If you try to say US, China, and other European countries. So basically in China, they started this blue economy long back during the 11th five-year plan that goes back to 2006 to 2010. And then basically at present, the share of marine economy, they call, or the blue economy or the ocean economy in Chinese GDP is greater than 10%. And it provides employment to more than 30 million people. So that basically is the data part, which I will be covering later on. But now, being a chair in Indo-Ocean Studies, I must try to tell you what we have been doing in IORA since 2014. So basically, the first conference on ocean economy, prior to the adoption of blue economy as a cross-cutting issue, when Australia was the chair, that was organized in Bangladesh in September 2014. After 1 month, in October, there was the COM meeting in Perth, Australia, when Australia was the chair. So in 2013, women economic empowerment was adopted as a cross-cutting issue. And in October 2014, IORA adopted blue economy as a new paradigm shift, economic paradigm model for ushering an era of prosperity for the benefit of the people in the Indian Ocean region. And all the member countries agreed to that. So then basically India was the chair of IORA in 2011. The India's contribution is significant in identifying 6 priority areas of IORA, that is in terms of maritime safety and security, fishery, this trade and investment facilitation, fisheries management. Then there was tourism and cultural exchange, science, academic, technology. So these were the 6 priority areas which were identified when India was the chair, and that was the start of basically doing the things systematically. But even before that, when IORA was established in 1997, member states have been talking about environment, member states have been talking about the marine economy, marine resources, all those things were there in the discussion. Then basically, we had 3 core group meetings, 3 ministerial conferences on blue economy. First was held in Mauritius, the second was held in Indonesia, the third was held in 2019 in Bangladesh. during these blue economy ministerial, we focused on the commitment to the blue economy. So, and then we also identified certain sectors in the blue economy, and shipping and port and shipbuilding. Then basically is fishing and aquaculture. So then basically tourism. So there were six areas which we identified under the blue economy, and in that case, basically at the world level, basically the issues were raised regarding the inclusion of lakes, cities, and other seas. That is, I'm referring to the very important conference on blue economy, which was held in November 2018, in which I made two presentations. So there, the United Nations Special Envoy, Peter Thomas, basically talked about linking this blue economy to the cities, to the coastal areas, as well as to the climate change. And now, basically, very recently, I submitted a paper, The Case of Blue Economy for the Landlocked Countries. So there also, basically, in terms of UNCLOS regulations and articles, I try to show that the achievement of the Global Sustainable Development Goal can be done only if we try to include the landlocked countries also. Now, if you take it to South Asia, in which there are 8 countries, and there are, 3 or 4 countries, for example, Afghanistan, Bhutan, Nepal. So these are the countries basically which are landlocked countries, and basically,
you have another 5 minutes. Sorry for the interruption. You have another 5 minutes.
Okay, okay, thank you. So in that case, basically, now let me come back to the Indian blue economy case. So the blue economy, basically, in India is being guided by the visionary and dynamic leadership of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He gave the concept of Sagar, and basically he tried to define this blue economy. That blue economy means blue revolution. And the potential of the blue economy for India is represented by the blue circle in our national flag. So that is basically blue economy has a potential for India in terms of port-led development, in which the present government is investing billions of dollars, which will be making our international trade cost-effective. Trade cost will be reduced. Then the other aspect which is there, basically, even in case of India and IORA, basically, and then I remember I was here and I attended that meeting. Prime Minister Modi came in March 2015 in Mauritius, and then he went to Seychelles. So the another thing which is very important, that is the cooperation in blue economy, which can be led by India at sub-regional level. The other thing which I want to tell, that is the accelerated technological change, artificial intelligence. So all these things basically are in abundance in India. So India basically has the potential to utilize this blue economy and to become a country which can achieve the double-digit growth rate, as well as basically can help the other countries to realize or to harness the vast oceanic resources which are available in their exclusive economic zone. And lastly, basically, a very important point, that is basically the blue economy, whether you call blue economy, whether you call it ocean economy, whether you call it green blue economy, basically depends upon or defines the utilization of local resources, local coastal resources, to promote localization and to ensure it for the benefit of the people. So in that context, the vision of the Prime Minister in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat means that we are utilizing the local resources in our coastal areas for the benefit of the people in India, as well as we are trying to get the strength, build the economy of India to assist the other regional countries or other neighboring countries, so that there is basically the peace and the prosperity in the Indian Ocean region. So it has a national perspective and it has a international perspective. Then the other thing which basically which has a been identified by the COVID-19, that is the concentration of global supply chain by one or two countries. So that global supply chain needs to be diversified, and there should be many actors. So that also merges with the concept of Indo-Pacific. So, and the concept of Sagarmala, the concept of Sagar, that is the security and growth for all in the region. These are the building blocks which can take our country at the top, and the country can help the other countries. Basically, this is an era in which multilateral cooperation is the only way to lead to the prosperity. And in that, blue economy has the potential to achieve the higher and faster rate of growth, basically having productive employment, employing our youth, and not only the youth at national level, but also contributing to the other regional economies, and thus leading to the pathways. Here, I'll be ending with the quote of one of my favorite Professor Kinderberger, who in 70s wrote that future belongs to the developing countries, and the path which lies for the prosperity of the human being, that is the multilateralism and collaborative and cooperative cooperation. Of course, blue economy also have maritime safety dimensions, which you have been discussing for all the 2 days. I won't be commenting on that. And in the last, basically, I will say that blue economy has a great potential, and it is a scientific idea. And what is required that if we do not embrace Industrial Revolution 4, which has been emphasized in the UN conference, which I attended in Mexico, that accelerated technological change or technological-led growth models are the future of the developed as well as emerging economies. And in that case, India can take the lead. India can acquire the double-digit growth rate, more employment, and also basically the security dimensions, collaborative dimensions. So that is basically, there is a great hope, great potential, and great role for India, what I call, I'm writing a book on that, blue economy at global level, or what is the role of blue diplomacy. So this is the age for blue diplomacy, and we should strengthen the blue diplomacy in increasing the, you say, security. India basically is the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. The security aspect, which is interlinked with the blue economy, as well as the blue economy potential in the post-COVID fight, and leading to the prosperity, stability of the Indian Ocean region. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Atal, for that outstanding presentation, which revolved around the blue circle within the national flag. So it's so central to whatever we do as a developing country. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we will not be able to take up the questions immediately. We'll club all the questions together towards the end of the session, and all the questions can only be put in the chat box. There will be no verbal interaction with the speaker. I hope you will bear with that. With that, now let me turn over to Captain Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh was a former co-chair and India rep to CSCAP, International Study Groups. He is MBA, he is MA, MSc, PhD, is a former ACAS fellow, and has had the rare privilege of being the lead co-chairman and India representative to consecutive CSCAP International Study Groups on Maritime Security, that's within the Council of Security Cooperation in Asia Pacific region, in the Track 2 version of ASEAN Regional Forum, and also during which he, along with delegates from nearly 22 countries, prepared 2 memorandum forwarded to ARF summit mates. He's also served in many think tanks in India and was a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, and earlier a research fellow and the de facto research in charge of the National Maritime Foundation, which is well represented here today and was also represented yesterday by various scholars from there. And he held the prestigious Professor D.S. Kothari DRDO chair at the USI. And I look forward to your talk, Captain Ghosh. I always call him Dada Ghosh. So Dada, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, sir. At the very outset, I would like to thank, it feels so nice to be part of this really great event. And I would like to thank the organizers, especially Commander Rao, Uday Rao, who got me into this, and of course the chair, whom I've known for so many years, both at ORF and at NMF. Without further ado, sir, I'd like to request you to tell me when it is 5 minutes, as you've done for Professor Atri, so that I'm aware of how much to go ahead.
I'll do that, Dada. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Aishwarya, can we have the slides, please? I found that my iPad was not really formatting my presentation properly. So I request Aishwarya to kindly share my slides.
Yes, sir. Just a moment, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll be speaking on Sagarmala. Some things of Sagarmala I've been tracking since long, and how big and how incredible this project is, I'll be trying to get across to you. Since this event is looking at China to a large extent, I will also introduce the Chinese element, in the sense that how do we compare with them. I'll also get into what is the current status of the Sagarmala, because that's what I've been asked to speak on. And there's not much literature available on this, but through RTIs, etc., we have been trying to get the current status. So I will be speaking on these. Now, what was the aspect which really led us to this huge program? I'll not speak too much on the ad nauseum statistics that is usually brandied about the 7,500 kilometers coastline for 14,500 kilometers of navigable waterways, 95% by volume, 70% by value of Indian exports by sea, etc. But what is important is, next please, what is important is that our efficiency is, if I may use a word rather bad or rather abysmal. The turnaround time for India is about 2.5 days. This is 2018-2019 figures. And the global average is 1 to 2 days. And of course, in ports like Mundra and Gangavaram, it is about 2 days, but that's not really good enough. So 87% of our freight goes by road or rail. And if you see, what is the reason why it goes by road and rail? See how expensive it is from this slide. How really expensive it is. Road rail, in fact, is one of the most expensive. Waterways is cheapest, but only 6% of the Indian freight goes by waterways. In the case of China, it is about 47%. Now, there is a bit of a dispute regarding this figure, because I also found figures which said that's about 40, and one more figure which said it's about 38, but I have put 47%. That's why I've highlighted it in red. Japan, 34, and US, 12.4%. Now, if you see this, our rank in the World Logistic Performance Index is a lowly 35th. And that is why in terms of efficiency, cost, sustainability, safety, we pay very high costs for our services. Now, this is the reason why we thought of Sagarmala, and the vision was this next. The vision was essentially to reduce these logistic costs. Now, reduce the cost of transportation, reduce the essential logistic cost, and for domestic and international trade. And this is the thought process which went behind it. It was originally mooted in 2003, but it finally came about in 2015. And in this, the government plans about 6 new ports across 5 coastal states, and it is going to be married to an extent with the Bharatmala, which is the road network. Now, come next, please. Now, what are the pillars of Sagarmala? This is, of course, port modernization, port connectivity, port-led industrialization, and coastal community development. I've put these 3 over here in a figurative form. The next slide gives you the details, how to augment capacity of port modernization, new ports, which I told you, efficiency, which is most important, then connectivity. Our last mile connectivity is absolutely abysmal. So we have got to get that. Upgradation of roads, inland waterways, logistic parks. Then, of course, in the port-led industrialization, we must connect the industrial centers to the ports. And in that context, we are going to have maritime clusters of these industries. I'll be coming to that slightly later, and SEZs, etc. The other thing is we have not forgotten the community, skill development for the coastal community, coastal tourism, development of fishing, etc. Now, this is very important. Next, please. In this, I have listed out basically what I said just now, so I won't spend too much time on this, except to say that Sagarmala also provides an impetus to move cargo through an environmental friendly inland waterways. And later on in question and answer session, we can take it up in much more detail. Next. Now, what are the components of Sagarmala? If you see over here, it was originally 577 projects with something like $130 billion worth of projects. In 2015, when it had come up, I had propounded a detailed paper. I was looking into the BRI of the Chinese. At that time, it was known as BRI, or rather OBOR, and now it is, of course, known as BRI. And I had suggested that we take the money from these Chinese banks and use it for our project. In those days, of course, China was not such a big taboo as it is now. And then, of course, the minister said that, look, we are not really hankering for funding, because funding will be coming to us, and I'll be covering as to how the funding will be coming to us. So these are the projects I've listed them out. Port modernization, 245. How much do they cost? It's about 5 trillion rupees. Connectivity, 2.8 trillion rupees. Port-linked industrialization, 5.2 trillion rupees. Coastal development, again, 75 billion, 577 projects. Now, of course, there has been a change in the number of projects. As for the latest listing, there are only 500 projects that we are looking at. Next, please. Yes, this is, of course, before I go on to the institutional framework, I would just like to mention a bit about the port modernization, because that is important, and that is what we are all very directly involved with. By 2025, we wanted to upgrade our capacity to 2,500 million tons per year. Our current capacity is about a little bit about 1,500. So it was quite a significant jump. But we wanted to increase the capacity to 3,500. By 2025, the amount would have been 2,500, but we wanted excess capacity. The sad and this was to be done partly under the Unnati efficiency initiative in all the 12 major ports. But we could only unlock about 100 million tons per annum. And there were 86 initiatives which were implemented, and it would give us a benefit of 80 MPTA, which is a far cry from the 3,500 that we hope to receive. Now, our in the institutional framework is what we are. This is just to give you an idea of how the Sagarmala will be working. We'll be creating CEZs, that is the coastal economic zones, which will have coastal economic units, and the SPVs. A diagrammatic representation is given over here. If you want me to go into greater details, we can discuss it during the question hour period, but I'm not going too much in details of this. But this is generally, and all this is going to be closely coordinated with the state Sagarmala committees and the state level SPVs. So this is just for a rough idea. Since the subject is very large, I'm sorry, I'm just skimming over some of the issues, just giving a little bit of details only in some of them which are directly related to us. The next one, please. Yeah, they have created the Sagarmala Development Company to carry out this entire initiative. Of course, the various ministries are going to carry it out separately, but this was the main nodal ministry as far as the Ministry of Shipping and Transport was concerned. And this was also supposed to implement not only the this thing, which is, like I said, responsibility of the various ministries, but also the residual projects which couldn't be funded in other fashions. Next. Now, I said we will talk about the Chinese example, in which case it was Shenzhen which actually led the way, and we looked up to Shenzhen. And if you just read through this, you will see what a phenomenal success it was for the Chinese. It was set up in 80. They built up the infrastructure up to 86. And the value of exports jumped from 900 million in 1978, 79 to 101,518 million in 2005. I purposely read out that entire thing rather than saying so many billion, because you come to know how much it has jumped. And not only that, it has given them less reliance on Hong Kong and on Taiwan. And the entire ecosystem has been built, something which we are sadly lacking. So I think we need to learn from the Chinese in these aspects. Next. What do we hope to achieve by Sagarmala by 2025, which is not very far, as you can see. Now,
Dr. Ghosh, you have another 5 minutes.
Okay, sir. So if you just go through this, you will see how much of an impact Sagarmala will have on port modernization. I've given all the figures. The logistics saving will be to the tune of 35,000 to 40,000 crores. It'll reduce the time of exports by 5 days. The number of waterways will double. And hopefully, we will be able to boost our exports to 110 billion US dollars. 40 lakh direct jobs will be created by this. Next, please. So this is what we hope to achieve. Where are we? I will just tell you, as far as coastal community development is concerned, we had hoped to train. There are 65 projects of 73 billion. We had hoped to train 10,000 people in 3 years, but we have trained only about 1917 candidates with 1,123 in line. Of course, we have set up centers. We are pretty good at that. Multi-skill center at JNPT, the National Tech Center for Ports and Waterways at IIT, which will help the inland waterways. And we are also trying to push the coastal tourism. But where we are is a matter of debate, as I show you now. I will not, next please. Yeah, I don't think I have the time. I would have loved to cover the funding aspect because that's really incredible. How we are also trying to go for dollar-dominated loans and getting to the development bank financing, something which only JNPT and Adani have done, but we were trying to do it for all the others. Next. Most of it was supposed to be PPP, but unfortunately, we have still got to build up the ecosystem around the PPPs, which we haven't done. As I've told you, planned 91 projects, 35 have been completed and 27 are under construction. Only 2 have been terminated. Next. This I had given the year-wise funding requirement for all the projects. It's obviously a bit dense. So I will leave my presentation. People can go through it. One has to go through with probably a magnifying glass to go into details of each project and how much it costs and what has. So let me quickly come to the status. Next, please. And next. Yeah, my last 2-3 slides is, this is what the Minister of Shipping informed the Lok Sabha. Implementation, as of now, 500 projects, not 577 that we started off from. 143 projects have been completed and 190 are under completion. Remaining 167 are under various stages. He says, of course, it'll all be completed by 2035. He's obviously very optimistic because it's his baby. I am not too sure. The implementation mechanism, I've given all state governments, maritime boards, SPVs. But like I said, next. This is the current status. I've put it down in a small thing of 500. Where is the current each project under the main headings: port, modernization, connectivity, etc. So this I have given. This is the most important slide, so to say. Unfortunately, I can't keep it on for long. The next slide, please. Yes. Now, really speaking, as per business standard, this is another of a, I won't say lame duck, but a hobbling duck. And only one project have been completed since 2016. 50 projects worth, 140 completed, 212 projects are still left. They're facing considerable problems with respect to land acquisition, and the RTI on the matter says the data is not available. In fact, the Karnataka High Court has stayed the phase 2 of the Karwar port. So things are not as hunky-dory as one would like them to be. My last slide is, I just thought I will speak on the disadvantages. Next one. Another aspect which has come up again and again is that there is a strong movement that is being created saying that it is damaging the humane and sustainable perspective in coastal India, and it is generating a lot of ecological problems. The National Fish Workers Forum, they're not a main body as one would say, but they are slowly building up. The National Alliance of People's Movements have stated that all these projects are being cleared environmentally without much thought. So we have got to give it more thought and more research, but how much that is going to be possible, I'm not sure. But overall, I think that Sagarmala is an incredible project. Even if it doesn't come up by 2035, if we reach the aim that we had set out to reach, I think we would have reached a long way. And India, the entire maritime sector of India, especially the commercial one, will see a new horizon. With that, I thank you all for the patient listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. I know in the first session we heard Professor Rcep talking about the centrality of our wheel, and we complemented it by looking at how these wheels of progress can be moved forward. So thank you so much, but we will reserve after all the three speakers have spoken for the question and answer session. With this, may I request now Professor Sundaraman, Shakri Sundaraman, to take over the floor. Let me briefly introduce her. Not that she is not known to others here, but for many of them who may be seeing her for the first time. Yeah. Can others kindly switch off their mics? It's a distraction. Please mute yourself, except for the speaker. Professor Shankari Sundaraman is a professor of Southeast Asian Studies and has served twice as the chairperson at the Center for Indo-Pacific Studies, School of International Studies, and the JNU. She joined the JNU in 2003, and prior to this, she worked as research officer and research fellow at the IDSA, which is now redesignated as Manohar Parrikar IDSA, and this is from 1996 to 2003. She was a visiting fellow at the Asia Pacific College of Diplomacy, APCD, at the Australian National University, Canberra from May to July 2005, where she worked on the trilateral relations between India, Indonesia, and Australia. All of them have become important to the calculations in Indo-Pacific today. She is also a visiting fellow of the Center for Strategic International Studies at CSIS, Jakarta, 2006-2007, and as a recipient of the Asia Fellows Award funded by the Ford Foundation. Professor Sundaraman has also been part of several Track 2 initiatives in Southeast Asia and Australia. She has several publications to her credit in journals, in articles, in chapters in books, media, and website commentaries, as well as a book titled Cambodia, The Last Decade. She is on the editorial board of two international journals, the Strategic Analysis, IDSA, and the Journal of Peace Praxis. She is also a visiting faculty and adjunct professor at the Naval War College in Goa. Of course, she did not come to Naval War College in Bombay and I was because she likes Goa better. With that, over to you, Professor Shankari. All the best. 20 minutes. I'll give you the call at 15 minutes so that we can wind up in time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I think anybody would say that Goa far outtrumps Bombay and Mumbai. So I think I can't be blamed for choosing Goa as a better option, but I promise to continue to stay associated with the Naval War College as long as they want me to be there. Good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to be here at this session. I'm sorry for missing yesterday's day's program. I was at another webinar, and this has become the work from home. I was actually sharing it with Director Shashi Nair that work from home has become work beyond time zones, so in that sense it's been difficult. So at the outset, my sincere thank you to the Press Institute of India, especially to Director Shashi Nair. He has personally reached out to me over the course of the last few months, asking me to be involved and engaged with the programs that are being jointly hosted by these three organizations. As Commodore Vasan has already said in the introduction, we've known each other for several years now, and it's wonderful to be part of your institute's work. And my greetings to both you as well as to Sri Heblikar and to your two institutions that are jointly hosting this event today. The paper that I'm supposed to be presenting today is on the ASEAN responses to the South China Sea issue. And what I would do is to sort of raise a few aspects of the South China Sea issue, because I know there are lots of young participants in the program. And I want to actually say that I'm amazed that there are nearly 70 people online for this event. And I think it's a clear indication of the success of your participation in this program, because to have people at a time like this, what we're going through, an unprecedented time, and to have 70 participants is excellent. So let me begin by sort of sharing a little bit of views on what I think are the relevant matters, which many of you already know, but for the younger participants will be very critical. That if you take the South China Sea region per se, I think the context of its strategic importance becomes extremely relevant from two significant angles. First and foremost, this is the area which is an important aspect of the regional security architecture, as it becomes the interconnected, oceanic extents that connect the Indian and the Pacific Ocean, which we are today repeatedly calling as the Indo-Pacific. The second context is that the South China Sea per se is a critical sea line of communication. And if you take the context of the choke points in this area, you have the Malacca, the Sunda, the Lombok, the Makassar, as well as the Mumbai Straits. All 5 of these straits are extremely critical to the region of Southeast Asia. And even though we are looking at it as the Indo-Pacific, the context of Southeast Asia's relevance, which is why I chose to work on ASEAN's response to the South China Sea conflict, the context of Southeast Asia's relevance remains excessively critical for us in the region. So the strategic relevance, therefore, of this waterway is important because of 2 aspects, both from the context of the security matters that are there in the region, as well as the economic implications that are based from this entire focus on the South China Sea itself. So in that sense, what I see is that the South China Sea today has overlapping sovereignty claims, particularly over the features of the Spratlys and the Paracel group of islands. And what you see is that after a rather complex and I would say an intricate kind of a colonial legacy, what you see is today there are asserted claims of territorial sovereignty over these waters and territorial sovereignty over the islands per se. So in that context, I think it's important for us to understand that in terms of the relevance of this region, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development has actually identified that nearly 30% of the global trade passes through the waters of the Indo-Pacific through the route of the South China Sea. And for India, it's even more because 55% of India's trade passes through these waters. And if you take the context of energy resource per se, then about 60% of energy passes through these waters. Now, how then, if we are deciphering, as the theme of this conference is, the maritime context of China's involvement, how then do we bring that thematic context into this entire notion of how we identify and view the South China Sea? Because as far as the volume of, say, energy supplies that pass through the region from Chinese perspective is concerned, 80% of China's energy requirements are met through imports that cross through the South China Sea. And about 40% of Chinese trade also passes through this region. So in that context, I think what becomes relevant is that if we bring it to the present context, China's economic growth that has been one of the sustaining features of its rise, and not so peaceful rise, if I may add, as well as the reliance on this unlimited source of energy that the Chinese are continuing to seek. I think what will be important is for us to understand that for the Chinese, the option of an unlimited source of energy supply is going to be critical. And therefore, many of the issues that you are seeing today comes from that premise that this region becomes predominantly an area of Chinese security interests. So how it's affecting the rest of the region is extremely relevant, and it's going to be extremely vital for us, therefore, as scholars to look at it. So I recall that the Asian Maritime Transparency Initiative also speaks about the resources that are there in the South China Sea itself, because these resources are also critical. There is an estimated about 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, about 11 million barrels of oil that are proved and probable reserves, as they call it, the probable and the proved reserves. So this becomes extremely critical for the region itself in terms of how the conflict in the South China Sea is going to be managed. To give a little insight into the historical factor, what I would like to do is to look at the claims itself, because if you go back itself in the 1930s, the French government was actually in control of the Spratlys and the Paracels. But if you go back previously in 1843, the Vietnamese claimed that they were in control even as early as the 17th century. So it is interesting to see this entire context that, this 1843 is when they were actually discovered, but Vietnamese claims go back to the 17th century. So if you take the for me, the clear-cut evidence that I would sort of rely on is from 1939, when the Japanese Imperial Army actually occupied the South China Sea islands as a part of their measure in their occupation of Southeast Asia during the war. And in 1947, after Japan's surrender, the Japanese were actually stripped of their possessions of the Spratlys and the Paracels. And it again, by the time the PRC began to claim it in the 1951 treaty negotiations, the question of the conflict of the South China Sea and the island areas remained largely unresolved. And it's very interesting to see, there is an interesting caveat which I noticed from a Southeast Asian perspective, because coming from the context of the area studies of Southeast Asia, I want to bring that relevance back into the debate, is that, you know, when you see the First Indo-China War itself, which is when the Vietnamese were fighting for their nationalist movement under the French colonial period, you see that at the end of the First Indo-China War, which is actually dated with the end of the Geneva Accord of 1954, Vietnam was actually divided into two portions of the North and South Vietnam. And interestingly, the southern portions of Vietnam were to acquire the territories of the South China Sea Islands. And it's interesting because the Chinese at this point were claiming these areas, and North Vietnam at this time actually supported the Chinese claims as the legal owner of the South China Sea Islands. And this was because, given the dichotomy between the North and the South, the North Vietnamese forces wanted to support the Chinese position vis-a-vis the South Vietnamese portions, which are already being supported by the United States presence in the region. So by 1974, when the course of Vietnam's history began to be more clear, what you see is that by which time China and North Vietnam had actually started to move away from each other, and the Sino-Soviet split had occurred. The Vietnamese were closer, the Northern Vietnamese were much closer to the USSR at that time, and as well as the Sino-US rapprochement had also started, leading to the US agreeing to Chinese occupation of some portions of these islands. And it's very interesting that when you see the larger context of the regional game that took place in this context, you see that much of the South China Sea issue remained unresolved in this context. So if we have to look at the origins of the 9-dash line, I think the first emphasis of this was actually done by the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China, the ROC. And in as early as I think it was 1947 that the ROC came up with a map that actually showed what is today the controversial 9-dash line, which is a kind of a cul-de-sac, kind of a line that roughly covers about 80% of the waters. Now, if you also take the context of the claims by other ASEAN countries, let me say that as early as the later half of the 70s, the Philippines and the Malaysian states started to claim islands in their own region. And this became even more concrete after the 1982 UNCLOS, because on the basis of UNCLOS, I think two countries, that is both Malaysia and Brunei, began to look at the South China Sea as the islands of that region as their own areas. Now, interestingly, what you also see is by 1978, the Philippines had issued a presidential decree, and according to this decree, the island of Kalayaan, which is part of the Spratly Island group, that began to be seen as Philippine territory. Now, Brunei also has a claim to what is known as three areas. That is, I think the Louisa Reef, the Owen Shoal, as well as what is called the Rifleman Bank. Now, all these three are claimed by the Brunei government as part of their territory. But it's interesting that both Brunei and Malaysia, however, claim it. And of course, the Vietnamese also have a large claim in the context of the South China Sea, both in the Spratlys and the Paracels. Now, why does ASEAN therefore fit into the context of the debate? I think there are two ways in which we can assess the ASEAN role in the context of the South China Sea debate. The first is that there are four countries that are basically claimant states, as I've already said: Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And there are three other countries that are, I would say, Singapore, Indonesia, and Thailand, for example, which are non-claimant countries of the South China Sea. But the efforts of these three countries has been to try and broker an honest kind of a peace, play the role of an honest peace broker, I would say, in the context of the conflict. And if you take countries like, for example, Laos and Cambodia, I think what you have seen in the recent, about the last decade or so, is that these countries have moved significantly closer to the Chinese position. And what you see is that these countries have actually not allowed for, particularly Cambodia, have not allowed for any kind of a movement to take place in terms of a resolution.
Professor Shankar, you have another 5 minutes. Sorry to interrupt you. You have another 5 minutes.
I will, sir, can you please give me a few more minutes, because I have a couple of points which I really want to raise. I'll wrap it up in about 7 minutes time.
All right, 7 minutes. Thank you.
So, thank you. So what I want to just point out is that in terms of resolution, what has been ASEAN's efforts, I would say that the first concrete effort at resolution came at the 25th ASEAN Ministerial meeting in 1992. And the focus was at that time to have an international code of conduct over the South China Sea, and also to ensure that its resolution was based on the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation and broadly within the framework of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. So where does the question therefore stand? I think for almost about till 2002, I'm going to wrap it up very quickly so that I can take some of the issues in the question and answer given the time factor. So until 2002, I think broadly, this was the strategy that the ASEAN followed, that repeatedly the emphasis was on moving towards a regional code of conduct. In 2002, you see that China and ASEAN actually drafted what is called a declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea. And this declaration was one of the eventual processes that has still been in a limbo, because from 2002 till about a decade later, that is by 2012, it was supposed to be formulated into what is called the a binding code of conduct. However, the most critical year has been 2012, because in the 2012 ASEAN summit, they were not able to pass a joint communique because by then the Chinese had actually managed to split the ASEAN almost into what you call the salami slicing of ASEAN, as they call it, where Cambodia became reticent about passing any resolution that would be carrying anything against the Chinese in terms of how it would happen. So the concrete years, in my view, are 2012 and significantly also in 2016, when the Permanent Court of Arbitration actually came up with a resolution on the Philippines having gone to the PCA, which ruled first and foremost in favor of the Philippines, and more importantly, it ruled that the context of the Chinese claims on the basis of historicity does not actually prevail within the context of the international legal space. So that itself, I think, has been very, very critical a factor. Now, if I come to the 6-point agenda per se, I think there is an important factor that the agenda, I will just quickly say what is the agenda, and 3 of the factors are very important. One is fully respect the universally recognized principles of international law, particularly under the UNCLOS. The second is the question of exercising self-restraint and non-use of force, which I think those of you who are following the events in the region will already know that is not being adhered to at all, particularly from the Chinese side. I think the third context is the whole issue of a peaceful resolution of the entire context. So nearly 2 decades after the signing of the what you call the DOC, where do we currently stand? I think even though it's been 2 decades, there is no movement forward on this entire context of a binding code of conduct. Now, the critical aspect of this binding code of conduct was that the binding code of conduct was supposed to move towards what is called a single draft code of conduct, which has not happened, because the single draft code of conduct has actually, what it has thrown out to most of us is the fact that there have been several areas on which the Chinese as well as the ASEAN states have not been able to come towards any kind of a resolution. The context, therefore, in terms of, let me come to the recent ASEAN summit so that I can conclude with that and the ARF meeting. So So it is very clear that over 18 years, the context of moving forward on the single draft code of conduct is actually not met with much success. So in June 2020, when the 36th summit of the ASEAN has actually taken place, one of the binding factors which I think has stood out very clearly as far as the South China Sea is concerned is that this year's joint communique actually very clearly highlighted that all 10 members of ASEAN are actually in favor of resolving the conflict according to the principles and tenets of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas. This itself has been a huge step forward as far as the ASEAN countries are concerned, because given China's salami slicing of the region, I think what ASEAN has been able to do is to finally come out with one version of a communique where all 10 members have agreed to this in the context of the South China Sea. Significantly later in August 2020 also, the ARF meeting has clearly again identified the question of the South China Sea and the COC being the code of conduct being the most important aspect. Now, in terms of this, where does it stand currently? As we've seen during the pandemic, and this will be my concluding point because I think almost my 5 minutes are up. During the pandemic, what we have seen is that there has been a dual strategy as far as the context of China is concerned. What the Chinese have basically done is to, on the one hand, they have used the entire opportunity of the pandemic to further and push their humanitarian assistance to the region. The Chinese have been have done the maximum in terms of humanitarian assistance, particularly for the Southeast Asian countries. Not just the Chinese state-owned companies, but also private firms like Jack Ma's firm have also given tremendous aid to the context of assistance in the region. On the one hand, this soft power has also been pushed by the Chinese. At the same time, if you look at the kind of aggressive posturing that has happened in the region, there is a duality of approach by which China has played its game as far as the pandemic is concerned. Now, this is a very critical factor because the context of international behavior at a time when a global pandemic is currently underway has exhibited the kind of emphasis that the Chinese are laying to the region in terms of a Sinocentric evolution towards what they see as the region. So I think this is one of the credible factors. I think as we look at the region, the question of ASEAN centrality is repeatedly coming under threat. And I think the context of ASEAN centrality will be very critical. And how ASEAN manages its own centrality, given that it has a lot of divisions within itself, is going to be one of the more critical factors. I'll stop with this in lieu of time and take up other issues in the question and answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Shankari. It was an outstanding presentation. In fact, many in the audience, wanted me to extend this session a little more so that they could hear you. But I'm sure you will use that opportunity during the question and answer session. So it was an outstanding talk in terms of understanding the relevance of ASEAN. In fact, some people must be wondering as to how we clubbed you along with two other speakers, who are discussing comprehensive national power. But, there were other time constraints.
Exactly.
Also your availability. But the fact that you brought out makes it very important for us to understand that you cannot have comprehensive maritime national power without dealing with blocks, without dealing with your neighbors, without dealing the dynamics of development ASEAN vis-a-vis China. So thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. With that, I'll throw open the floor for the question answer. As usual, I'll also request those who have presented to kindly look at the chat box so that they are aware of what questions have been posed. However, Aishwarya will facilitate the process of putting all the questions together and addressing them to all the three speakers who can respond in one go. Instead of taking up each questions, you may kindly make a note of the questions that are being posed to you so that you can respond together and link them up. Thank you very much. Aishwarya, over to you.
Yes, sir. Just a moment. So I will read out all the questions, and there are many questions for Dr. P.K. Ghosh. I will read all the questions and name the speaker it's addressed to as well, and go forward from there, sir. Just a minute.
All right. Before that, Dr. Ghosh, have you made a note of the questions in the chat box?
Hello.
If you already made a note, then there is no need to read it. you can go ahead and straight away respond to the questions.
I'll just copy it.
Yeah, that'll be better. We'll save some time. We are running behind time, so I'd request your help in ensuring that you look at the chat box and respond to the questions together.
Okay, so first question is addressed to Professor Shankari, and it's posed by Pratap Heblikar sir. The question reads, requesting to enlighten us on India's decision not to join RCEP and its impact on India's and regional security, especially Irrawaddy transit corridor being developed by China. This question can be fielded by other speakers. Another question for Professor Shankari is posed by Commodore Venugopal, and the question reads, there is increasing apprehensions that China would push the code of conduct through based on their interest before Philippines relinquish the chair. Before the Philippines relinquish the chair. Comments, please. Another question for Professor Shankari is posed by Vice Admiral B. Kannan. The question reads, would China reduce its presence over dependence on sea lanes through Indian Ocean by developing alternative sea routes through Arctic zone? Those are the questions for Professor Shankari, and there are two more questions for you, ma'am. Another question by Vice Admiral Muralidharan is, will China? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, Aishwarya, I don't mean to interrupt. Can we just take them a bunch at a time rather than all the questions? I'll open it in my chat box.
Okay, ma'am.
Because otherwise, because in this format, responding is very different, because in a normal format, it's different.
Yes, ma'am, yes.
Yeah, may I just please then, should I go first?
Okay, ma'am, okay.
Or should we wait in the same order with Professor
No,
Atri?
I suggest you go ahead and finish it, and then we'll allow Professor Atri and Dr. Ghosh to come in. Because all the questions
thank
are already before. Please go ahead.
All right, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. First, foremost, I think the question raised by Shri Heblikar, I think on the China-Myanmar Irrawaddy economic corridor. I think if you take the Irrawaddy corridor per se, it's a part of the Chinese BRI. Okay, and the idea is that they want to connect Shanghai to Kunming, and then from Kunming they want to go through the route of the Shan state, and then from the Shan state into the region of Bhamo. It's very interesting when I look at the Chinese BRI, what I actually find is that it's a reverse of the colonial process, where the colonial powers extended their overland route into China, into inland China, through areas of Burma, and today the Chinese are using the same reverse pattern in reverse to extend their route outside. So what I find is it is actually a fascinating what you call reversal of history that is actually taking place when we look at the BRI per se. The question of the Rcep, in my mind, I think India did the right thing not signing the Rcep. And this is because if you take the Rcep per se, I think there's about 100, and I've recently written a piece that will be published in the website of the Kalinga International Foundation. This should come out in another day or so, I guess. So that piece actually argues that if you take the level of trade deficit that India already has with the Rcep countries, there are 11 countries of the Rcep members with whom India already has a trade deficit. Okay, people have argued that this was one of the way for us to integrate further, particularly on the economic front with the region. My sense is that, yes, for the ASEAN countries, I think there's a way that we have to look at this. And my argument is that, I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of ambient noise. Can anybody please put off their mics while I'm speaking, please? Thank you. What I would like to sort of state is that the context of the Rcep becomes very critical, because when you take the Rcep per se, the debate is not between whether ASEAN wants us in the Rcep both as economic or security partners, but also the debate is between India's domestic politics and its commitment to regional integration. If your commitment to regional integration outweighs what is happening domestically, I don't think it's a healthy environment for any government to take up. So as a result, there have also been arguments that it will increase our competitiveness. I think the context is our competitiveness is already weak. The very fact that we still have, in spite of the India-ASEAN FTA, if we still have a trade deficit with the ASEAN countries, and we are looking at a larger trade deficit of nearly $150 billion, I think the context of competitiveness does not occur overnight. So the context is to ensure that your competitiveness is complete before you regionally integrate, which is what other countries have done. So the context is to liberalize internally first before you actually take that liberalization outside. So, and I think this distinction is being missed in the larger context of how we have actually assessed the Rcep. So in that sense, I think the decision on not signing is a pragmatic decision which we have actually adhered to. The second question that I think Sri Venugopal Menon has asked me is the entire question on where does China will push the context of the COC through. The Chinese are very clear that the COC will be worked out bilaterally within each of the claimant states with China, and then endorsed by the ASEAN. The ASEAN is not comfortable with that framework. The current chair is Vietnam, not the Philippines, and the next chair is likely to be Brunei, and the next chair after Brunei in 2022 will most likely go back to Cambodia. For the ASEAN, the question of resolving this while Vietnam and Brunei are the chair are more critical, because once it goes back to Cambodia, the capacity of China to actually manipulate Cambodian leadership into taking a position that is supportive of the Chinese position is very, very critical. And for the ASEAN, that is not acceptable. In fact, recently, the ASEAN even had a discussion in its 35th ASEAN roundtable, where one of the leading Singapore diplomats and policymakers actually made a passing reference to leaving Cambodia and Laos out of the ASEAN framework in the context of protecting the 8 other members. So I think what you're going to see within ASEAN is a lot of churning, and this is directly related to the fact that Cambodia and Laos have come so close to the Chinese position itself. The next question is by Sri Kannan, whose question is on whether the Chinese would be able to reduce their dependence on the Indian Ocean. I do not think the Chinese will reduce their dependence, because if you see the fact that 80% of China's energy resources are coming through the Indian Ocean, as well as the Straits of Malacca and the remaining straits in the region of the Indo-Pacific, the Chinese dependence on this region will remain. What will happen once the Arctic zone is opened is that the Chinese can trade can move through that region, but its entire dependence on its energy resources will still continue to come from the Indian Ocean region, is the sense that I get. Aishwarya, have I answered the 3 questions that were addressed to me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the rest of the participants can go ahead, please. Thank you.
Yes. Ma'am, there's one more question addressed to you.
Okay. Aishwarya, no more questions for Professor
Yeah,
Shankari. We're running out of time. That can be responded to in the chat box. Please take up questions for Professor Ratri, followed by Dr. Ghosh.
Okay, sir.
Sorry,
okay, sir.
Professor Shankari, I know a lot of questions are for you. Your lecture was so interesting. But
thank you so much.
Time, yeah.
No, I fully accede to that. Not a problem.
Okay, sir. The question to Professor Atri is posed by Dr. Bamadev Sigdal. The question reads, how could we link blue economy with green economy philosophy for growth adopted by developing countries and Nepal? Another question for you, sir, is posed by Prakash Panirselvan. The question reads, can you explain what kind of capacity building measure India should take in order to strengthen India's cooperation with small island countries?
Okay, thank you. In fact, let me just come to the first question, that is how to link the blue economy with the green economy. Here, one thing is that I pose to all the panelists, everybody agrees that oceans are important. And I, as mentioned, oceans are under stress. The question which needs to be answered, can ocean be frontier of next paradigm shift, which I raised philosophically? Can we think that ocean can resolve all the problems? And if I go back to the population pressure, that is 9.8 billion by 2050. So if we take the technological aspect, that says that, as Guntar Pali has put it, that it is the age of abundance. Then there is a contradiction with economics, which is the science of scarcity. So can you converse that abundance will overcome scarcity? Whether there will be scarcity of resources or not? To that, basically, the answer still needs to be, analyzed. And my view is that economics will always be there. And even if the scientific developments are there, you cannot overcome this scarcity. The other big issue is, who is controlling the accelerated technological change? Whether it can be used for the benefit of the mankind, or it can be diverted the other way. The third thing, which is basically is, and I'm coming to the green blue also. So the green blue, basically green economy, when we talk about, that is focusing on the environmental protection. In blue economy, when we relate it to the ocean, we are focusing on the environment protection as well as health of the ocean. So basically, there are various names: green economy, blue growth, ocean economy, sustainable ocean economy, unsustainable economy, brown economy. But you see, there is no contradiction between the blue economy or the green economy, and the World Bank is working on the investment portfolios as well as the donor to the World Bank on the basis of green-blue investment. So that is basically whatever we are doing on the land, that is also being done on the ocean also, and that is the conservation of the resources. So this is one basically thing. And then the second question, basically, what India needs to do in order to build capacity. So the capacity is already there, you see, technological capacity in India's are there. What we need, that is basically the coordination. And the key pillar of the blue economy, if you see the history of all the successful countries who have been successful in reaping the oceanic resources, whether it is US, whether it is China, whether it is Australia, whether it is the Scandinavian countries, and particularly I'm referring to the EU countries, they have been successful because they were successful in implementing the marine spatial planning, which is still in making in India. You see, there was the Prime Minister Economic Advisory Council meeting in May 2018, which I attended, and I also contributed paper to the marine spatial planning. So the first thing is the marine spatial planning needs to be strengthened in case of India, and not only in case of India, in case of IORA also. But there are few countries which are working seriously on the marine spatial planning. In that context, the Indian collaboration with Norway is a welcome step. So in that case, you see, basically, India is moving forward in having a collaboration with Norway, which is a very big, which is a very, you see, a positive country, and which have the technology in the use of the sustainable development and the oceanic resources. So that basically should be there. And then the third thing is that, as I mentioned, that the Prime Minister visited the Mauritius, Seychelles, Sri Lanka, and then Bangladesh, then some African countries long back 2015 and 16. So we need to create systems. There are systems of system and their system. So that is basically to create the capacity in India to help the SIDS country, we need to focus on innovativeness. We need to focus on systems thinking. So that is the thing which basically I am focusing on, systemic thinking for the solution of the global problems. You see, basically most of the problem in ocean economy or the green economy or the green blue economy or the blue growth are transboundary in nature. Whether it is the ocean acidification, whether it is climate change, whether it is the plastic pollution. So in order to solve the, global issues, we need to adopt systemic thinking. And the systemic thinking is the blend of the natural scientist as well as the social scientist. Whether you are a lawyer, whether you are a scientist, so all those needs to be clubbed together. So these are some of the responses. I hope that answers the queries of the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Aishwarya, you may now pose the questions to Dr. Ghosh, who I will request him to be brief in his response.
I've seen through them. I'll answer them. But before that, I just wanted to make a comment. Shankari's excellent presentation, which was absolutely brilliant. But what she didn't mention was that there have been other efforts at conflict resolution at the South China Seas. In fact, I headed a delegation to all the claimant countries except Brunei in trying to resolve the issue. And of course, nothing much came out of it, obviously. But what did come out of it was the COC. And in fact, the COC draft came to us first when we were, much before it was released to the public. And then we discussed it. But that's another story. And this is not the reason why I am on this seminar. But we could go on that. But excellent presentation.
Professor Shankari, the right to respond could be exercised during lunchtime, with your permission.
Okay, fine.
Okay, no,
Yeah.
So,
Dr. Ghosh, please keep your responses brief. We are way behind our schedule.
I know I don't have much time, so I will not go on to a lengthy. But I'll quickly mention, firstly, Admiral Kannan's question about the internal waterways, which are in many ways drying up. And absolutely, I entirely agree with you, sir, that we have to maintain the internal waterways. And there has been a lot of effort in this, a lot of effort. And in fact, this should be clubbed with Admiral Ganesh. It's very nice to see you over here, sir. Ganesh's question about the rivers not being perennial in many places. That is precisely one of the biggest headaches. And, certain sections of the river are only navigable throughout the year in some of the rivers. And of course, dredging is a very big problem. So upkeep of these waterways is a continuous process which is going on, and the government is aware of it and is looking, and many of the projects deal with this, in fact, even in Sagarmala. A lot of money has gone into this. So this is, now how does it help the landlocked states? I think it helps. If you look at Shenzhen, these SEZ that came up, apart from the fact that its own economy is booming, I think the entire economy of the country is booming. And mind you, the Sagarmala is in many ways not only trying to develop, of course, it is developing the ports and what all I've told you, but it's helping the country's economy. So please don't think that this is only a coastal effort. Of course, all the money, all the projects are going into the coastal effort, but Bharat Mala takes it on to the entire network of continental roads, if I may use the term. So there is a lot of reservation by some people about, well, what does Jammu and Kashmir really, or let's take, what does Rajasthan benefit from Sagarmala? The entire economy of the country benefits from Sagarmala. And like we have seen the statistics of how much of our trade goes by sea, etc. So if the trade is increased by $110 billion, I think the country benefits. So this is my point. Now, regarding connecting, Commodore Venugopal has asked about dry ports and wet ports. This is one of the most important things that is being looked into, and there are various initiatives and projects which do that, including connecting them up to the corridors, the industrial corridors. So the impetus is being provided. A lot of money is being generated for as funds for these projects. So I'm not going into details. Obviously, I don't have the time. I wish I had. I would have gone into each of the projects to sort of clarify the issue. Lastly, I think Ms. Shah has said about countering the BRI and its finance. As I told you in the presentation, in 2015, I had written a paper on how to take the finances from the BRI developmental banks which were set up. That, of course, wasn't needed, as the minister himself had said. But the idea is not to counter BRI financially in that sense, but to counter BRI as a whole. I think that is more important. So we have got enough funding for our Sagarmala through various projects, through, as I told you, even dollar-dominated loans, through developmental banks, etc. So I wouldn't really try and say that, look, we are countering the finances of BRI, but the strategic aim should be to counter BRI as a whole rather than the entire finances. The rest of the questions, I didn't see any other questions. If there are, I'll be happy to answer probably individually, whichever way it is.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the three panelists for a wonderful session. You know, I'm reminded of what Professor Suryanarayan tells me. You know, he's part of us. You know, whenever I invite him, he says all the professors normally take 20 minutes to warm up, and you're asking me to wind up within 20 minutes. And he says that's not fair. So by that logic, with three professors on this, I have to give 1 minute, 1 hour just for warming up.
So I fully agree with him, sir. We're used to 2 hour classes, so asking us to say anything in 20 minutes is very difficult.
Thank you so much. You know, despite the time constraints, we did allow some extension because I know the topics are so very interesting. And such competent panelists who are there, who done full justice to the topic. I'm sure we'll carry on with this conversation. We'll also be planning many more events in the future. All of you, please join me virtually in giving a big hand to all the three panelists. And
Thank you.
we look forward to their continued presence here so that they can take on some more questions in the chat box and also set up contacts with others. Already I have had many requests here asking us to indicate the coordinates of panelists, and I'm sure they'll be getting in touch with them privately. Thank you. Jai Hind.